So hey everybody, I'm David Cohen. I'm one of the founders and managing partners at Techstars. I'm going to tell you a bit about Techstars and what we do, and then see if we can be helpful to the Latin American startup community in some way. And hopefully some questions will roll in as we're talking here, and this can be a useful resource. So first I'll start with a little bit of background on me and sort of Techstars and what we do. So I've been an entrepreneur basically my whole life. I had one job interview after I went to college or university system. The only job interview I ever had in my life. And I got that job working as a programmer, writing software code. Did that for about a year and then decided I didn't want to work for anybody else in my career and started creating companies. My father had been an entrepreneur. He was an accountant, but he had a whole business built up around it that he started. And I had been around entrepreneurship my whole life and really didn't like working for other people. I felt like I was creating a lot of value, but wasn't capturing much of that value. So I started my first company back in tell you how old I am now, back in 1990. And that company was doing ambulance dispatch software for essentially ambulances. We were creating software to help them, get to patients faster and pick them up and save lives, hopefully. So we created that business. I had two co-founders, built that up. We eventually sold the company to a public company called Zoll Medical. So that was my first experience in entrepreneurship. We did very well with it. We didn't raise any money. We didn't need any venture capital. We were completely bootstrapped, except for $100,000 US dollars. That was the only money we ever raised, and we raised it from our first customer. So we did it kind of uniquely and differently. We didn't know anything about venture capital or angel investors. We just weren't aware of it, really. And so we built the company up, sold it. It's still going today. It employs probably 300 or 400 people. So it's quite a large part of the acquiring company that bought us called Zoll. And that was my first experience in entrepreneurship. So it's sort of like, maybe going to the World Cup the first time you ever play soccer or football. So, right, it was a kind of an amazing experience. And after that, I started another company called Eye Contact that failed. It didn't do very well. It was very much like Foursquare, that some of you may know, essentially a mobile social network. It didn't do well at all. We lost some of our own money. We lost a little bit of our investors' money, although we returned some of it. We had raised money in that company from some of the customers from our first company that knew us and liked us. And then had another small company called Earfeeder that worked and was sold. So I was an entrepreneur. That's what I did in my career until about 10 years ago. And I was a programmer in all those businesses. So I was the founder and CTO of all of those businesses. Somewhere in there, about 10 years ago, I started dabbling in angel investing, which is when you invest your own money into startups. It was an interesting way to get some experience, helping other companies and maybe make a little money or not lose money, hopefully, investing in them. And it was really fun for me. And I had been lucky enough that I had enough capital to make some investments. I made about 10 investments like that, and I didn't like it. The reason I didn't like it is I didn't feel like I was getting very much time and engagement with the companies. I felt like I was just writing a check and then, not having a lot to do with the business. And so I came up with my fourth startup idea, and that startup idea is Techstars today. So in 2007, I started Techstars as a way to make angel investing make more sense. And what Techstars was at that moment in time was the idea that we would fund 10 companies in the summer of 2007 in Boulder, Colorado, where I live. It's a tiny little town of 100,000 people. In a state of only about 2 million people in the US. And we provided a little bit of startup capital, only about $20,000 US, so just a little bit. And we would take a little bit of ownership, founding shares, and no control of the companies that we would invest in. So we put out a call for applications that first year, and 302 companies applied. they were attracted to not just the capital, but the mentorship. So we had organized a great set of mentors to spend time with these companies. Of the 302 companies, we picked 10. We spent the summer with them in this big experiment. We had about 50 mentors from the community that were successful entrepreneurs trying to be helpful to these companies. And, we knew there was something magical going on. It was not only a lot of fun, but these companies were starting to be interesting. And they were getting a lot of network value from these mentors in the community. So a year later, I think 3 or 4 of those companies had been acquired. The founders had made real money from it, and we decided to do it again. Now, interestingly, that same summer of 2007, Andrew Hyde walked into my office, and he said, "I have an idea. This is an amazing thing that you're doing here with this 3-month program at Techstars. What if we did something similar for everyone in the community that lasted just a weekend?" And he had this idea that he called Startup Weekend. And I said, "What a great idea. You should go do that." So all of us that were part of Techstars, just a few of us at that time, and all of the 10 companies that were in the program went to the very first Startup Weekend in Boulder that Andrew Hyde ran. And we tried to be helpful, and we built a company in a weekend. And so that was going on at the same time that the accelerator that we created was starting in Boulder. So both of those things started in Boulder. So over the years, Techstars has grown. Today we have 22 accelerator programs. We're around the world. We're in South Africa, Israel, throughout Europe, and certainly all throughout the US, and are expanding that footprint globally. So there are 22 accelerators that happen every year. Half of those programs are a traditional model, like what you might think of as Techstars New York, or Techstars Boston, or Techstars Boulder, or Techstars London. They fund internet companies. Today we give a little bit more money. It's $120,000 per company. We still fund about 10 at a time. So we're funding around 220 or 250 companies a year in this model around the world. And Startup Weekend, meanwhile, was growing up on a different path. Different people were running it. Mark Nagar got involved and bought the Startup Weekend from Andrew Hyde and really built it up to an amazing organization. And there were 1,000 Startup Weekends last year around the world. So we didn't have any control of that or own it, but it was sort of born at the same time and had a lot of the same DNA and sort of give first attitude and community attitude. So just last year, we actually acquired Up Global and merged with Startup Weekend. And so now that's all one big family. So it kind of came back together. So that's 2/3 of what we do. We run these events around the world to inspire entrepreneurs, like Startup Weekend. We run things like Startup Digest, Startup Week that happens all around the world. But we also have this very large footprint in accelerators where we're funding hundreds of companies a year. And the third part of what we do today is venture capital. So we manage about $300 million of our own venture capital that we deploy into those companies as they grow alongside the venture community. So that's what Techstars is today. It's all of the events, all of the acceleration, and all of the venture capital. We're about 140 people today around the world. We're very distributed. We have people on the ground in dozens of countries. Our largest office is about 25 people. That's a small portion of the total staff. So we're very distributed. We love startup communities. We love helping them get better and rise and create more great companies. And so that's what we're all about. And we're having a lot of great success. Our companies that have been through the accelerator programs now have raised more than $2 billion. They're worth more than $5 billion. We've been fortunate enough to be able to invest in some other great companies like Twilio and Uber that are worth tens of billions of dollars and are part of our ecosystem. And so that's sort of in a nutshell who I am, how we got here. And what we want to talk a little bit about today maybe is the Latin American startup community. I'm certainly not an expert. I've only been to Chile. We were talking before the call started just one time. Actually, I'm going at the end of the month for personal reasons. It's just a little bit of a vacation. My partner, Mark Solon, was just down in Patagonia as well. I spent time in other parts of Latin America, South America. Certainly a lot of activity going on there, very interesting, and we want to be a part of that growth over time. So we certainly look to, over time, expand to the region. Today, we're already running many events. I'm sure many of you know about Startup Weekend. Hopefully, you know about Startup Week or Startup Digest. So we're trying to extend the network into that part of the world. I think there's a lot of promise and a lot of opportunity there. We know that there's also a lot of challenges, maybe a lack of capital, a lack of experienced mentorship. And we're hopeful that we can help in some way with that over time. So at the very high level, that's what we do. And happy to just sort of talk through any questions that are coming in from the community, or anything else. So let me know what you want to talk about, and we'll talk more.
Well, thank you, David. We have a lot of questions here, so I'm gonna translate it. They sent more than 20 questions, so I already
Great.
selected 6 that are like more general. And let's start. Well, here from the south of Chile, from Concepcion, they're asking, what's the opinion that you have of the Latin American ecosystem? Do you know about the information? It's growing. What kind of what kind of information or news do you have about us?
Yeah, so like I said, I'm certainly no expert. We do have people that are on our team that are in that part of the world, and it'd be fun to get them on a hangout at some point and talk to them as well. But I went to an event that was actually in Rio de Janeiro not too long ago. It was a global venture capital conference, and there were representatives from every part of the world that came to this event. And we talked for 2 days about the state of venture capital and entrepreneurship in all different parts of the world. So I certainly met a lot of interesting people and learned a lot about what's happening in places like Chile or Colombia, Mexico, and so on. And I was very impressed by the growth. I mean, there's certainly a lot of a lot of companies being started. There's certainly a lot of venture capital and private equity starting to look at the region. At the same time, there's challenges in some of the sort of economic situations, or challenges in the regulatory situations. So I know that it can be pretty different country by country and even community by community. Things like Startup Chile, I'm very familiar with. Obviously, a lot of great work being done historically there. We've actually had the good fortune to work with some companies that have been a part of Startup Chile. So we see lots of activity and lots of opportunity. We see more capital flowing into the region, but still, lots of issues and different issues in different parts of the region. So, it's certainly very promising and something that we at Techstars want to be a part of as it continues to grow.
Okay, we have another question that's from Santiago. The question is, what's your interventions in the startups that get into Techstart?
I think I understand. What do we do with them?
No. The thing is that in your role,
in
Techstart, do you manage a lot? Like, you decide this company enters, this company not, or you have like a whole group that analyzes the different startups that apply?
Yeah, right. So I'll talk about a few things there. It used to be that it was me, and you would apply to Techstars and we'd get 300 applications and I'd pick the 10. As we've grown, it's certainly not the case anymore. So we see about 1,000 applications per program now. So we're talking about 20,000 or so companies a year that now apply to Techstars to get into those 200 or so spots around the world. And so we have a global team. Generally there's someone we call the managing director that works on each accelerator program. So just to make it an easy example, in London, right, we have a managing director there, Max, who is looking at applications and filtering them down to maybe the top 50 or top 100. So I actually will never even see companies that don't make it to that level. These are all angel investors and people that work for Techstars that we think are great investors. So they do that work. And then my partner Mark and I and Jason and Ari and other partners in the organization look at those most interesting companies and help that managing director pick. So we do that, again, 22 times a year. So that makes it manageable for us. But our goal is to make sure that every company that applies gets a little bit of feedback if they ask for it. And if they don't make it to the level where I'm seeing it, hopefully they can apply again. Most companies that get into Techstars don't do it on their first try. They have to apply multiple times. So today I spend most of my time helping the managing directors pick those final few companies to get into each program. But also I'm mostly personally focused on the venture capital fund. So I'm sitting on a lot of boards of some of our companies that have grown to be big companies. You have companies like DigitalOcean, right, or Sphero or SendGrid, where we might spend time on the boards of those companies. Or when we're doing a Series A investment, which might be a $3 to $5 million investment down the line, that's where I personally, I'm spending most of my time today. So we have a great global team that's focused on the accelerators and helping select the best companies.
Well, thanks. Here's a really good question, and it's really direct, and I think it's going to be a good one. You said that you have presence in 3 different continents, right? When do you think you can expand your brand to Latin America?
Well, I'm hopeful we could do it this year. One of our mantras at Techstars is quality before quantity. And so we've been very careful as we've grown, and we've grown pretty quickly, but we've been very careful to not just go do stuff that isn't good. And so for us, it's about finding the right partners, the right people, the right managing director, as I was talking about earlier, in the communities that we're interested in. And we're actively exploring those things in Latin America. We have people spending time there very regularly looking at those opportunities. So, I mean, I'd be very surprised if we're not there in the next few years, say 2 to 3 years. It wouldn't surprise me at all if we get there in 2016.
The idea, David, it's to have presence in one country or have like different offices. For example, representatives for in Chile, in Peru, in Colombia, in Brazil.
I think it would start with one. That's what we do. If you look at what we've done in Israel, right, we're starting with one. If you look in Africa, right, we're in South Africa. We're only in Cape Town. We were brought there by a great partner that we have in Barclays that helped us manage that and already has a presence there. The likely model would be that we have a partner somewhere that wants to help us enter the region. We have a great managing director, and we pick a spot and we sit down there, and we have a lot to learn, right? The last thing we ever want to do is drop into a community and pretend we understand it and that we know the right way. It'll take us a year or two to learn from the local community, to understand the way things are done there, and we would want to hire somebody that's local, that is well respected. That's been our model. But over time, again, in the next 5 years, I would expect that we would have a major presence in many countries in the region.
Okay, I'm gonna have another question. Here is for example, here's in the egos of the entrepreneurs that apply and enter to Techstars. For example, you said that you're more focused on venture capital. How do you handle this kind of egos for the CEOs? For example, the CEO of Uber, in this case.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean. How do we handle the egos of them? Like, are you just saying like a lot of these CEOs are difficult people, and how do we help them?
Exactly. Yeah, they have their own vision, and they have like their vision and mission, and getting feedback from different. How do you handle that?
Yeah, so I think the idea of the mentorship-oriented ecosystem that we're building is that no matter how smart you are or how much you can get help from the network. That help might be a great idea of what to do differently in your business, or it might just be an introduction through the network, right? If you want to meet someone, right? Someone in our network is going to be able to help you do that, or get a meeting to pitch them on your product or whatever. So we're great at helping people find partners and investors and individuals that they're trying to reach. That's a big part of it too. But I mean, you mentioned Uber, right? I mean, I think sometimes you just want to get out of the way, right? and say, how can I help? And I think Uber's a case like that, right? Travis and his team are obviously incredible. And, all we did early on is we tried to be helpful. They said, what if we did some free rides at your demo day events? You're attracting 1,000 investors to your demo day events. Why don't we give away some rides or discount some rides around those events, and you promote it? We said, sure. And I know that early on, that's how a lot of investors found out about Uber, right?
Awesome.
We invested when the company didn't have a car on the road, right? And it was just one person, right? And I think a lot of the investors who came to those events experienced Uber for the first time that way. So sometimes you just want to help. Other certainly CEOs that you run into, yeah, they have a big ego and they know exactly what they want to do, and sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong, right? And it's their company and they get to do what they want, and our view is we're just there to try to help.
Okay, perfect. We have two more questions. Okay. This is a personal question. It says, with all of your knowledge and experience that you had acquired in your years as an entrepreneur, can you tell us what is the most common mistake that you make? And if that mistake is a generic one, or it depends on the personality of the person.
Yeah. Well,
That's
there's
a good
so many
question.
mistakes to make, right? And I've seen them all, right? I can share my personal experiences and tell you about some of the mistakes I've made in my
Yeah, of
career.
course, please.
Yeah, I could also tell you, I've seen 1,000 companies, right, and the mistakes they make. So the problem is there's often a few good paths that get you to your goal, and there's a lot of mistakes to make along the way. And I would say that first I'll share mine. The company that I talked about earlier that failed. I think I'll give you a quick example there. We had a lot of ego. You're just talking about ego about what we thought should exist, right? And we didn't do enough talking with customers. We just went and built it, and the market said, who cares?" Right? And at that time, this was, again, I'm old, so I tell you stories that are from a long time ago, but they're always relevant. Back in the day, you didn't have the iPhone, you didn't have an app store, right, that you could put your software on and have anybody in the world download it. We actually ran into problems with that mobile Foursquare-like software of getting it into people's hands, right? Distribution. I learned the lessons of how important distribution is for a software product. The internet has fixed all that now, right? We can get our product in anybody's hand. But back then, it was very difficult to get the product out there. Another story, from my own career is, I didn't surround myself with the right mentors at the right moments. And I'll tell you a very relevant story that is kind of funny and kind of painful. When we sold our first company, that company I was telling you about that was the ambulance dispatch company, we sold it to this company, Zoll, and it was great. We made a lot of money. It was a great outcome. Everybody did very well. And we negotiated it ourselves, right? We had never done that before, and we're working with the CEO of a public company who's probably bought a bunch of things and was much further along in his career and had a board of directors helping him, right? And here we are, these few people that have never sold a company before, negotiating, and we got to a happy place and we made lots of money and it was great. Well, a couple of years later, I was having a meeting with that CEO. My co-founders and I were talking to him, and he said, I don't know if you guys know, but you left half the money on the table, meaning I would have paid twice as much. And, we were obviously very annoyed that he told us that, because that company, after we sold it, we got that public company stock, and it actually went 5 times what it was worth in the public market. So what we thought we were selling it for increased by 5x. So if we had twice as much, it would have increased even twice as much again. And it was a lot of money that we left on the table. And the reason is we didn't engage anyone who had ever done this before as a mentor. That lesson would play itself out in 2007 in the first ever Techstarts accelerator. We had a company called Social Thing that sold to AOL, and we got on the phone with AOL and doubled the acquisition price, right? And so there's very clear value to mentorship. There's very clear value to network that entrepreneurs underestimate massively. There's an example where our 6% ownership was easily worth 50%, right? Because that entrepreneur got a lot more money. So I think surround yourself with amazing people is the big lesson from my career and my experience that can actually help you and have seen all of these things before. Doesn't mean you have to take their advice, but often it's very useful and very valuable.
Well, not a good history. Well, and you obviously got the return from the company that sold in AOL, right?
Yeah, that company sold to AOL, and again, it would have been half as much without the mentor negotiating the value.
Well, everything happened for a reason. Well, and the last question that we have here, it's in terms of soft skills. He's asking. He says, "What do you look up, or what it takes more of your attention in the teams of work, more comparing to the quality of the professionals? What do you look in terms of like a team? Like they have
Yeah.
their join, their emotion, their passion. What
Yeah,
do you look more? What do you think
got
is
it.
more important?
Yeah, so a lot of investors, and we're no exception, talk all the time about team, 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 right? How important that is. And so essentially the question is, well, what about the team, right? What are you really looking for? And
Yeah, exactly.
my biggest, the easiest way that I could describe this is, there's all the prerequisite stuff, right? Which I call the ante, just the cost of being in the game. I mean, I have to believe you have great talent, technical talent, ability in general. I have to believe that you have high EQ, meaning you're a good personal relationship person, because business is about personal relationships. You have to have all that stuff. That's not the special stuff. That's the stuff that you just have to have in order to be successful as an entrepreneur. If you don't know, if you're not very talented and can't create a product, you're probably not going to be very successful as an entrepreneur. And again, we're talking about the team, right, in total. But the one thing that I really look for and that stands out to me in the 1,000 companies I've worked with, it has to do with that passion that you were talking about, but it has to do more with motivation. Passion's a throwaway word. We're all very passionate about what we're working on. But what is the true motivation? What's driving that entrepreneur? So when I first met Ryan Graves from Uber, he had a vision of how the world would work, right? About how transportation would work in the future. And he cared more about that than anything else. And he was obsessed with it, right? And that's why I liked it so much. And those are, to me, the founders that really stand out, is they're obsessed with the product. They're obsessed with their vision of the future. They are maniacal about making progress on that vision at the expense of everything else. They're not overly focused on how much money they're making today. They're not overly focused on valuations of their company. They're just focused on making progress, right? And it comes from the heart and not from the head. So it's not, when you talk to the entrepreneur that I like, it's not, hey, I did this spreadsheet and I think we can make a bunch of money here. Rather, it's, I want to change the world, right? I want to have this following impact. And, there's going to be value in that, but I believe that this change should happen in the world, and it's an important one. And, it coming from the heart, not from the head. The source of their passion is identifiable. So let me give you an example. We had a company called ScriptPad. In the US, I don't know about other parts of the world, doctors scribble prescriptions on a little piece of paper. It's called a prescription pad. And they give that to the patient, who takes it to the pharmacy and gets their medication.
Yeah, of course. It's same here in Chile.
It's absurd, right? That's how we still do it. And of course, we know that you can't read the doctor's handwriting. And so this particular entrepreneur had a situation where his father was almost killed because the wrong medication was delivered. Right? The pharmacy read the prescription wrong, and his father was, severely affected by this, and he was mad. He was really pissed off about this, right? And so he went and did the obvious, right? He created a online prescription system, and that passion really drove him more than anything else. And it was very evident that he cared about this problem, and that's what I'm attracted to as an investor is the why of the entrepreneur, not just the what and the how.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah. Well, we don't have more questions, and we don't want to take more time from you. So you just keep on having fun there, skiing. So thank you very much on behalf of the Latin American community. There's a lot of saying hi to you, and we would love to have you here in Santiago. And let's keep in touch so we can have like a beer or something and keep on speaking. And maybe we can present to you what Milatam it is and what the model that we're creating, that it's been inspired by what you have creating in Techstars.
Excellent. Well, thanks for having me, and hope everybody has a great rest of the day and great weekend.